Okay, recording in progress. All right, I am gonna share my screen here. I have to share my whole desktop in order to get the sound that I want. So just bear with me. Okay, so I am gonna talk. I have slides which I hope are really interesting and not boring. I think they're really interesting. Can we all see this? Yes. Okay, I can't see you, so I'm going to take that as a yes. Great. Yeah, so it's great we have two Cornish grads here because the way that we are now is vastly different, probably. Actually, I know for sure that it's vastly different than how it was when you were all at Cornish, and I think that that's going to be really interesting discussion point because there were some issues that needed to be solved and then also things that needed to be celebrated and embraced about who we are as Cornish. And so, yeah, I'm just going to be talking about how we have integrated technology and specifically Ableton into our new curriculum, into the student experience. And I like to think about that as we are on the cutting edge of music programs in general in the country and even in the world at this point. And we're a small place and we're in the Pacific Northwest. So we're not the most visible of places, I think, if we're thinking about, national recognition of music schools. We have some, but I think that we're at a really exciting point where we are doing something that no one else is doing. And I think we are training musicians to be completely, supported and employable and, self-actualized in the world that they will enter actually after they leave our program. So I just wanted to start this with like a little bit of a discussion with everyone from all of your different backgrounds as musicians that work with technology. And maybe it sounds like many of us have gone to college and have maybe a traditional music degree. I just would love to hear from all of you about what are some problems that come to mind when you think about getting a traditional music degree. So maybe the music degree that you got, I know the music degree that I got was very traditional, right? From an undergraduate institution in 2021. Does anyone have an answer to that or some thoughts they want to throw out about some problems with that? Or maybe some good things? I don't know.
I have some thoughts
Yeah.
about that. I feel like some of the classes that I took at Cornish, like it's obviously like music theory, ear training, all of that stuff is very essential, right? For a music degree. It's, like kind of goes hand in hand with the traditional, but essential.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I feel is lacking or was lacking at the time was a very like modern day quote unquote actual skills, like entrepreneur skills, because as musicians that is what we are. We're entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah.
And so we're constantly like setting our own goals and like doing whatever needs to be done to achieve those goals. And I feel like current trends and like current things that are happening in the music industry is just kind of being in the background and not really focused on. And so that's what I feel was the major thing that was lacking is like actual modern day trends that need to be addressed and need to be learned and embraced as part of the traditional training.
Yeah. And what year did you graduate, you said?
2018.
Yeah, I started in August 2018. So yeah,
nice.
right on the coattails there. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you for those wonderful thoughts. I totally agree with all of that. And many of those things is what you'll see were what prompted some of the changes that I'll be talking about. So anyone else? It doesn't have to be obviously about Cornish. I used to teach at SPU too. So it's interesting to have an SPU grad in here. Anyone else want to speak to this a little bit?
Yeah, something that came to mind for me, I went to school back in Pennsylvania in a place called Mansfield. And just in general, that whole like Northeast area of the United States, they like, if you're going into music, you're going to be a music teacher
Yeah.
or you're going to like be a performer.
Yeah.
And those are the two options that they tell you about. And they don't really tell you about all the other plethora of options. So like, you know, there is a music technology degree available, and that's the one that I have. But you know, all I was really encouraged to do with that was recording classical music or doing live sound for jazz.
Yep.
Um, yeah, which I
Exactly.
enjoyed. I very much enjoyed both of those things, but there's so many more options.
Yeah, there's so much more to it. Yeah, I hear that. I hear that a lot. My undergrad was from Whitman College, and it was very like a classical, super duper intellectual liberal arts degree. I have value it so much. I don't regret anything about it. But then when I went to grad school, it was in Boston, and it was very. There were some inklings of some really cool progressive things that started happening that I think have launched me into the way that I'm interested in integrating all of these things. But yeah, it was kind of the same when I was in grad school. It's like, all right, you're going to be a classical performer or you're somebody that works with technology. There is no overlap, or you'll
Yeah.
teach, and that would be
Oh,
completely different too, right? Like there
there
was
was
just
one
this.
tiny point of overlap, and that was like the small core of nerds at the school who were doing electroacoustic music just for
Right,
fun.
right.
That was like the piece of pie in the Venn diagram.
Yes, that would be where I fell in.
Yep, that's kind of
And
where I fell into.
yeah, really super interesting, super interesting. Anyone else have a
I just want to
response
like
to this?
thoroughly echo what Chelsea said about the Northeast music tradition. It's like literally why I came to Cornish because I was applying to music schools and they're like, great, so you want to be a flute player in an orchestra? And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
Or
absolutely.
like, or awesome, you play flute. Do you want to double in my jazz band?
Or do you want to go to the Crane School of Music up in Potsdam, New York, which is
Oh yeah.
yeah, the moon, and
Yeah.
like learn to be a music teacher for high schools and hate your life.
Right.
And then Cornish, I felt like I was really attracted to the electronic music program at Cornish because it felt holistic in a way that a lot of the other tracks didn't. Like I was learning a lot about the theory and the really intense, like the physics and like tables of numbers and all that stuff really appealed to me. Like technologically, I was like, because to me, there's more to extrapolate from that than a really prescriptive track. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. Sort of a follow-up question that I have here on the second line. What are some problems? Again, we're starting off on a real negative foot here, but that's how we solve things, is we identify problems. Getting started working with music technology at any point in one's life or career. That's sort of this next question. I'll frame this by saying that I have my undergrad, I have a BA in music performance, vocal performance, classical voice. I have an MM in classical vocal performance. I have an MAT, a Master of Arts in Teaching in Music, and then I have a Doctor of Musical Arts in Composition from UW, which was where I first started learning about technology. My doctorate was where I first started learning about technology. I was 25 years old before I ever even used a DAW. And that it was a big problem. I mean, I'm inclined towards those things and I'm very self-motivated. So I was able to learn what I wanted to learn and direct it towards my interests when I was in graduate school, but it was very difficult. And I have peers and colleagues that encountered, had a similar background and encountered so many difficulties and stigma getting into technology. So I'm just curious if any of you have feedback on this, maybe thinking a bit separate from your school experience, but what are some roadblocks if you're interested in technology and you want to get started?
I put it in the chat, but just money.
Yes.
Being able to purchase gear.
Yeah, and like it's so much better now than it was.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like in the 90s, terrible. Now you can get so many things for free. Thank you, internet.
Yeah.
There are so many more tools available.
Yeah, this is a really complicated, money is such a big thing. And I would say it's probably the biggest barrier. And because of what money means, like in our society and what's associated with that, we have class and gender and race stuff associated with that can exacerbate like all sorts of different stigmas and ways that people think about music technology. We all know like a gearhead who's used their gear is sort of like I think of it as like an old boomer idea where like the gear that you've acquired is kind of like a status. It's like a status symbol, or it becomes part of an identity with that I think is, you know, I mean, that's problematic in a lot of ways, but I really think about that as like as a class, you know, situation and an access situation, which I think is a big problem that, you know, we can work to solve because, as you say, things are becoming more accessible. Good technology is getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So how can we find those price points that are really accessible to people and proliferate those as teachers or just as artists, right? Using stuff that's affordable and making great art with it and talking about that can be really important. And then Frank says in the chat, resources and genuine guidance. Yes, like guidance, huge thing for me. I just found that it was hard to find anyone to mentor me because there was, at least in my program, there was a little bit of like, oh, you don't already know about this? Well, I'm not going to teach you about it. So there's some weird, that's a kind of gatekeepy thing, right? And it's all sort of connected in this weird way. Those are some of my experiences that, you know, you are all reflecting in yours, which I think is really interesting. Any other thoughts about that?
Well, I was thinking, like, you guys were talking about the cost of gear, and I was thinking, like, really quick, well, it, like, in my experience, all you need is like a computer. Doesn't even have to be good, because you can like work around that. But then I checked out price of Ableton Live. It's still insanely expensive. For the Live standard version is $450, and for Live Suite is $750.
Yeah.
I think when I bought it, I got like an educational discount. But that's still a lot of money.
Still pricey, yeah.
Yeah.
We've been for teaching, we've been using other free online DAWs and stuff like Soundtrap and BandLab. Yeah, Ableton is expensive, but at the same time, it's kind of one of those things where I remember like how expensive everything was a couple, 10, 15 years ago, and how it was really inaccessible to like everybody.
Yeah.
It's more accessible than it's ever been, but it still has a ways to go. I think you're right about that, Evan.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And when I think about like the cost of Ableton, I think it's really important to look at it in context of other DAWs. Prior to some of the changes that we made that I'll be talking about, we had like a big Pro Tools system, and Pro Tools is way more expensive. It has less functionality, and that oftentimes there's like proprietary gear involved with that, which is an extra expense. I mean, there are ways around that, I think, with a lot of DAWs, but even though Ableton kind of sits at this price point, there's still, Pro Tools is more expensive. Ableton is much more versatile at that price point. So it's kind of, we really had to think about this a lot when we were deciding what is the best DAW that we can train our students on that like may serve them like, the most bang for their buck, or like will serve them the most when they leave school. A big problem that I found when I was running technology at Cornish with Pro Tools is those fucking iLocks, those stupid USB things that people lost, and like you couldn't run Pro Tools, or you couldn't even, or maybe you could open it, but like you wouldn't be able to create an audio track. Just all of this clunky stuff that's made. And then the customer service with Avid, I mean, it's just like I'm picking on Pro Tools because I love to do that, but this is kind of true for other DAWs and other software and things like that just make the accessibility component, even though Ableton is expensive, all things considered, we decided that this was going to be the right direction to go for a lot of reasons. So I think it's interesting to have that conversation about getting started with technology and Ableton and accessibility. I'm looking at the chat here. Yeah, thanks. I love. Oh God, I want to throw them in the trash. I hate them. I hate them so much. Like the guy who had my job before me just like didn't label them, and I didn't know where they were, and I didn't know what license they each applied to.
Mhm.
Anyway.
Yeah, we used USB extenders and taped them to the underside of the desk, so you never saw them. Never even knew they were there.
Yeah. See, a system like that could work, not just leaving them in your desk. Kate, I'm looking at your comment. Yeah, there definitely is there's a stigma thing about using anything other than Pro Tools, because there's this industry standard thing. If we're going to train people to be producers in the industry to college, then you should teach them how to use Pro Tools. I mean, there's some truth to that, but like the traditional studio model of you go to a place and you're a producer there is becoming less and less like the only way that people experience using DAWs or experience music production or get involved in music technology. So I think that if that's the way that you're going to be teaching DAWs, just getting Pro Tools because you think that that's what they're going to need to know if they want to work in a studio, it's a very limiting path. And if that's the only thing that you're teaching at your school, then you're leaving a lot behind. So that was something we thought about a lot too. So, all right. Lots of things brought up there are exactly what I identified when I got to Cornish in 2018. And so I'm just going to talk about a little bit of some of the things that we wanted to fix, just in a general view of technology. Obviously, this has a lot to do with software and it has a lot to do with DAWs, but there were other things too. So our curriculum, and those of you that went to Cornish this might resonate. When I got there was little to no technology integrated into the curriculum. There was a DAW class and there was a technical production for musician class, which I still don't know what that class did, gonna be honest. There were some good things in there, but it wasn't in a place in the curriculum that made it accentuate any other things that people were learning. So these things were just very isolated. Intro to DAW, 1 semester class, tech production, 1 semester class. And then Dr. Tom Baker had a class that he taught called Composing for Electronic Media, which is an upper level elective that was not required for all students. So it was just very fragmented. It was like, there were these little nods to technology, but the problem being that we had a 7 model program, if I'm remembering that correctly, meaning that they're in a small department of between 50 and 70 students. There were 7 different majors and people had to be tracked on these: classical instrumental, jazz instrumental, classical vocal, jazz vocal, that's supposed to say jazz vocal, composition. When I got there, we had composer, performer, and all of these majors had different requirements in our program. So that had to be addressed. And then in the addressing of that, there was this big question of, there are students that are going to go through their 4 years at Cornish and not have a single class where they're interfacing with any kind of technology. That probably would be the case for people on the classical instrumental performance or the classical vocal performance track. Even so, in the jazz tracks, I believe you could get around it. And that was just not serving our students. It was not serving the world of music, right? So we did this big overhaul and created a 1 model program. So now our students, everybody leaves Cornish with a major in music, and that's it. There's no tracks. People naturally develop the things that they focus on, and we deeply, deeply encourage that. One of our outcomes for the department is synthesizing an emerging like personal sense of musicianship. So we have very, very different musicians that come to our program, and they develop their very specific skills through the faculty that we have in private instruction. But everybody takes the same classes, and I'm going to talk about a good chunk of the classes today that incorporate technology without othering it. Okay, so that's something that I think about a lot. Another issue that we had is we didn't really have much representation of who our students were in our faculty or in our curriculum. And I mean that by identity, race and gender, and stylistic representation as well. Our faculty is very fragmented in terms of what people specialized in. And as such, our curriculum is also very fragmented too. So if you're a jazz instrumental person, the likelihood that you would be taking a class on, Baroque music was none, right? But maybe those things should actually, people should be, getting a good, broad education as musicians together with each other. And technology is involved in that too. So that was something that needed to be addressed. And then, of course, we had space issues. We had the most hilariously terrible recording studio in our basement. And you can read my article that was published. Maybe someone can link it in the chat. I can do that at the end of this, where I talk about how I remodeled the recording studio. It's not perfect by any means, because Cornish is not made of cash, as we talked about, a little one slide ago, right? Technology is expensive. So in order to have really state-of-the-art facilities at this school, or at any school, there's a lot of investment that has to go into that. But Ryan Lewis did give us a nice chunk of money to remodel our recording studio. And so we turned it in from like a Pro Tools proprietary 2 channels of recording, that's it, space with a really slow computer and crappy monitor, to there's a brand new iMac in there. I got Genelec surround sound speakers, lots more inputs. So students are not only working on like music production projects in there, but they're exploring like spatialized sound and lots of different creative ways of working with technology. And we just did the same thing with, we have a brand new piano lab that at each station, there's like a little Focusrite recording bundle, 88 key Korg stage piano, a microphone, good monitoring headphones, and then Ableton Logic at each station, and Super Collider, which we do some coding and stuff like that. So our spaces have improved as well to support the new curriculum that we developed. So these are some of the problems that we solved in some of our solutions. Some of the philosophies behind this were destigmatizing technology in the mind of the musician, right? So we get a lot of like students, we all know the student that's like, oh, I'm a classical pianist. Like, I don't do that. Like, I don't do anything with technology. Destigmatizing that, not othering it, like we were talking about at the very beginning, like not tracking it as this thing that's separate from the other things, because it's not, right? My line about that is that the piano is technology. And over 100 years, we've decided that keyboard skills become a very important aspect of musicianship. I think that a DAW is like the piano of 200 years ago, right? It's this new piece of technology that becomes very, very useful, maybe in some ways kind of essential to have at least some understanding, a working knowledge of it, right? To be able to support any of your goals as a musician. We were also very interested in using technology creatively and in an out-of-the-box way to dismantle stereotypes. So what we didn't want to do is decide that we were going to become like Berkeley, like a music production school, because to me, that is still kind of othering and tracking in a way that still separates that practice from the other musical practices that are present in our student body. So in order to do that, it was important to me that we not talk about technology as just music production or just DAWs or just recording, just mixing, right? But that all of these things are integrated in everything that you might want to do, any creative project that you might want to take on. Maybe there's an interesting way that technology could interact with that, so that we, again, just like remove any of the stigma or barriers there that people have in their minds. These questions of accessibility, practice, versatility, and choice. This is one of the reasons why we chose, I mean, we still support like students using all different kinds of software that they may have or be comfortable with, but we have Ableton as kind of what we use in our curriculum and in our labs primarily, because it's a wonderful DAW that you can not only compose and produce on, but you can perform with it. Improvisation is a huge part of our curriculum, and Ableton is beautifully set up for improvisation. And of course, with like the Max connection, the kind of out-of-the-box things that you can do, it really is just set up exactly in a way that fit with how we wanted to teach students how to be musicians. So throughout our curriculum, we have an integration of performance, composition, improvisation, and technology. I'm going to show you some specific examples of that. And through doing that, we're able to talk about music polystylistically, which is a great word that I love that sounds fancy, but really just means like we're talking about all styles of music in we don't even have a theory class anymore, and I'm going to talk about that. But in our musicianship classes, which take that place, we're not just looking at Mozart piano sonatas to talk about theory and modulation, right? We're looking at, anybody that you could think of, like any artist that you can think of at any style, jazz, pop, folk, styles from around the world. Our chair has a expertise in Celtic music, like just everything is coming from everywhere. And then, of course, what I already talked about, creating these new spaces that we're inviting for students to explore all of these things in, and for us as faculty to teach these things in spaces that supported this kind of thinking was really important. So I'll pause for a second. Does anyone have anything they want to throw out there that's relevant to what I've just said before I dive into some curriculum stuff or questions? No. Oh, chat. Woohoo. Okay, so here we go. The way that technology happens in our curriculum is that in our one model program, I'm going to try to say this so simply because it is elegant and simple and beautiful. Our first years take a 100 level class called Sound in Theory and Practice. Our first and second years then take a 4-semester sequence called Musicianship, which is in place of theory, ear training, keyboard skills. And in these musicianship classes, they're using Ableton to work on those skills. And so that's the first 2 years. We have Sound in Theory and Practice. I'm going to talk in detail about these, but I'll just go through these slides to give you a visual here. First year, Sound in Theory and Practice. First and second year, Musicianship 1 through 4. In their third and then second year, Fundamentals of Electronic Music. And in their third and fourth year, Topics in Music Technology, Topics in Generative Music, and then through all years, Private Instruction and Cornerstone and Capstone projects and ensembles through all those 4 years. Okay, so these are all required classes for every single student. Every single student takes this beautifully elegant sequence of classes in support of whatever else they're doing. This is the core curriculum, right? Every student takes all of these. So that's a huge deal because that means that every single student, even if you're a classical pianist that has come to Cornish to hone those skills, by the time you graduate, you will have made music concrete in a DAW, maybe with some tape. You will have made a piece with analog synthesis. You will have made soundscapes. You will have done field recording because that's part of your core musicianship. So very exciting. And it's been going so beautifully. At the end of this slides, I have some case studies about some students that really show how well this is working. Apologies if you hear some large noises. My partner is moving his speakers and gear around in the garage right next to me. So, all right. So I hope that that at some point, maybe Tom can come to one of these and talk about his sound class because it's really quite brilliant. But this is the first class that students take where they interface with technology in their first year. And this is the description of it. An introduction to sound as a naturally occurring phenomenon and as the raw material of artistic practice. Students examine the physics of sound, psychoacoustics, Paulina Oliveira's deep listening. She's sort of the grandmother of our whole curriculum. The manipulation and capturing of sound through technology, and the history of sound studies and electronic music. And this is open to everybody in the college. It's required for our music majors, but it's open to everyone. And no prior knowledge of any music technology is required for this. But by the end of the class, they will have made a sound art piece using Ableton. And I'm going to show you some examples of what that looks like because Tom was very nice and sent me a Google Drive folder with some stuff in it. So let's see. Can everyone see my screen still? Thumbs up. Yes. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. So this is the final project in this class, and I'll just zoom here so maybe we can see it. It's a 6 to 10 minute ambient sound art piece. And again, the students that start this class have no experience with technology most of the time, unless there's someone coming in, who maybe learned a DAW in high school, which is a lot of our students, and I'll talk about that too. But and so they're just recording samples and they're using an effect, some kind of effect processing and automation. That's kind of what he focuses on in this assignment. So limiting what the students have to learn in order for them to be able to do these things well in Ableton, right? And then making a piece out of just those very simple things. So he's got some cool screenshots of some of, again, these first year music major pieces, right? Whoops, some automation. That one's just kind of a single track. Some of these are actually, I love screenshots of these. They're quite beautiful. Like this one, like, I don't know what this piece is, but I don't know. I love looking at this as something that a student who's never used Ableton prior to this class then makes a piece, you know, and we all know how complicated something, just getting something like this to sound good can be, and they are tasked with that. So I've got some samples of this, and maybe I'll just play like 30 seconds, a random 30 seconds of something. This was not my class, so I don't actually know any of these pieces. So I'll be hearing these for the first time along with you all. These were all made in Ableton, so. Nice silence break. Let's see, get a taste of another one. So we get an idea of some kind of interesting creative stuff that's happening at this very, very first year level. I think it's so cool. I think about the first year of my college education. I just absolutely didn't do anything like this, right? Yes, Tom's class is very, very wonderful, very important, very crucial. I see it maybe expanding into something even bigger, right? And I think he's like having to teach 2 sections of it this year, which is really exciting because students across the college are very interested in it. So that's where they all start. And then after and concurrently with this, see, they are taking musicianship. Okay, so this is where it gets really simultaneously like really nitty gritty and also really, really, really exciting. Like I said, our students don't take theory, they don't take ear training, we don't even have those classes. Keyboard skills, piano class, we don't have that because it's all integrated into musicianship 1, which is fall semester, freshman year, musicianship 2, second semester, freshman year, musicianship 3, and musicianship 4, which are in your second year. And in those classes, you are learning theory, you are learning ear training, you are learning keyboard skills, and you are learning Ableton at the same time. And Kelly Ash, I don't know if any of you know Kelly, but she's an instructor at Cornish, and she has been beautifully teaching this curriculum for the last year and a half. We launched this curriculum fall of 2020, which was hilarious because we were online and we'd spent 10 years writing this curriculum, and then we had to do it all online, which sucked. But because of the technological integration, it actually went a little bit better than maybe our old curriculum would have online. So she's been teaching it for the last year and a half. And in musicianship 1 and 2, there's not so much Ableton. That's when they really get used to notation software and the concept of MIDI. And then it's in musicianship 3 and 4 where they start to use Ableton and they already kind of have an understanding of MIDI. And then of course in Tom's sound class, which is happening when they're in musicianship 1 and 2, that's where they're kind of getting their first taste of Ableton. So it really works out quite beautifully. And then in their second year, they're doing this. So these are just the learning outcomes, right? They're in this musicianship 3 at the same time that they're learning about modulation and seventh chords and all that kind of stuff, and ear training and, hearing chords and transcribing chords. They're also doing all of that while utilizing intermediate MIDI functions in Ableton. Okay, so an example of an assignment that Kaley has in Musicianship 3 is to transcribe something, first 8 bars of We Find Love by Daniel Caesar, and via MIDI. So not just transcribing via like we're sitting down in class with our manuscript paper and writing the notes out. They're writing the notes out either by notating it in Finale and then importing that MIDI into Ableton, or notating it on the piano roll. They're both very important things to understand how those things work, right, in the software. So that's a really cool thing that our second year students are doing. And then in their last year, or their last semester of musicianship, in Musicianship 4, they're expected through this sequence, and then also with the sound class and the fundamentals of electronic music class, which I'll talk about next, to really flexibly operate Ableton as a MIDI tool. And using the arrangement view, right, to be working on multi-tracks and to be kind of thinking about form. That was a really fun conversation that we had. How can an arrangement view, like in Ableton or in any DAW, actually help us see the form of a musical composition? Incredibly useful tool that if you think about like a non-technological conservatory degree, you just wouldn't go there probably, right? So this is how it really like just accentuates all of that learning. And so this is an assignment, okay, a composition assignment using all of this like gnarly theory stuff, okay? We're not skimping on theory. We're actually teaching it really, really rigorously, but they're learning it with these tools. So these are the requirements of this composition. Probably couldn't do this very well myself if I tried, so really good. Then they have to record it. They don't just write it out on staff paper, right? They actually have to play this, right? Record these things using MIDI, which that's keyboard skills, right? And then they have to bounce that recording and make it into this kind of composition, and it's also notated. So in this assignment, we just beautifully see how it all comes together, and the kinds of skills that they will have built by the end of this class, end of their second year in their degree, which is really exciting. Okay, let me keep talking. Concurrently with that class, the end of their second year, they're going to be taking Fundamentals of Electronic Music. This is a class that is a holdover from our old curriculum that maybe some of you who went to Cornish remember. This was one of the things to keep, right? Tom had developed a beautiful, beautiful class just teaching people about the origins of electronic music, the fundamental ways that sound works in analog tools. And then when I took the class over, given that I am a digital person, very much so, he does everything, but he's also got like such a mind for analog technology. I am like a computer programmer. I'm all digital. So I was kind of tasked with maybe modernizing this class a little bit, although I don't like to say it that way because I think it's all really, we still teach all the same stuff, but instead of like prioritizing we're splicing tape with the blade, we might do that, but then we're also going to make a music concrete piece using those ideas in a DAW to understand how tape is the foundational like idea behind the way a DAW looks, right? So in this class, and this was also partially because of the pandemic, we had to be able, like, I wasn't gonna be able to get a reel-to-reel in everyone's apartment. So I was like, well, we're gonna have to modernize this and incorporate digital tools to explore these analog concepts, which ended up being really wonderful. So in this class, we talk about a lot of stuff, but we have a unit on musique concrète, right? So this is just, it's building off of what's happening in the sound class, but actually very specific to tape music of the mid 20th century. And they have to make a tape piece in a DAW, and they all used Ableton using these techniques, but no effects. So just splicing of an audio track, looping it, speed manipulation, so stretching it or transposing it, reversing it, and then layering it. Just only things that you would be able to do with analog tape, doing those in a DAW. So it was really hard for some of these students to not like add a bunch of cool, frequency modulation or whatever, filtering and stuff, to make an interesting composition with just these analog tape techniques in a DAW, but they did some great stuff. And I gave them all an audio file of seagulls that they had to use. They all used the same audio file as if it were the tape that they were all using to make this piece. So I'll play you some examples of that. I'm gonna jump in the middle here. So I love this piece. Just seagull sounds and just those simple tape techniques. Again, that's a student that, you know, our curriculum was the only experience that she had, was bringing to the table with the DAW. So very cool piece. And then I'll just talk about this from here. I also have them study, we do a deep dive into sampling. We like study Grandmaster Flash and like early hip hop and, you know, Questlove lectures, like the whole thing about where sampling comes from, vinyl, DJing, the deep history of that, and the deep history of that co-opting of technology. Again, I can't get all my students to have like 2 turntables and a huge like crate of vinyl. So we talk about those histories. There are some online tools where they can play around with like DJing techniques in a really, really analog way. But then I have them use those techniques that we talk about to make a beat-based piece in Ableton. And I'll play you one example of that. These were so good. This one's my favorite.
Listen to me. An outlaw. Criminals. Criminals.
Do you always sing at Walmart?
Desperado. Criminals. Outlaw.
Or do you always sing at Walmart?
Criminals.
Yeah.
Guilty.
Well, that's the only store we've got.
Okay, so that piece uses the sample of a Walmart yodeler kid that was on Ellen, and then a breakbeat sample. And the student that composed this is now a singer-songwriter, but she came to us as a classical violist. And again, this is the music that she created using samples, you know, a breakbeat and this other sample. Those are the only, and then just like time stretching those and making them fit in a very kind of minimal level of processing, right? Love it. Love the Walmart. All right. So that happens, and then we get into the fun stuff. And this is where I'm going to actually show you what I and my students are doing now on Ableton. So this fall, I'm teaching. This is an upper level class. So after they've taken all of those, they're ready to start getting into some deep stuff with DAWs, with Ableton, with technology. And so I crafted this semester's class, which falls into this topics in music technology bucket, where we explore all sorts of advanced music technology things. So it might be like an advanced class on mixing or other things like that, maybe arranging and recording. They already have a foundation in DAWs so that they can really, really dive into the in-depth stuff about technology. So in this class, they're learning how to perform with electronic tools. There's a lot of different ways that looks. They did a piece using fixed media, and now we're in the half of the class where they're working with performing with live processing, mostly digital. Some students are exploring some analog tools like a looper pedal and stuff like that. Most of them are actually integrating everything. So some projects that we're working on now, I have a student that is a jazz singer. That's kind of where she came from, but she has, like everyone at Cornish now, like wide-ranging interests. She's going to be doing some live vocal loops into a physical analog looping unit, but then that unit is going into Ableton. And she did that because loop-based music, to her, the loop gets old after a while. And so she wanted to be able to process the loop through Ableton with some kind of live interactive tool as she's like singing a tune over it, so that it gets more interesting over time. So what she opted to do is to use Live 11's new envelope followers and LFOs and map those and chain those together from her live singing, so that the loop will change. The loop coming from her looper will change over time. She's still working on this, so I don't have an example of it, but I do have an example in live of what that chain might end up looking like for her. An alternative thing that she might explore is using Touch OSC, which is iPhone app connected via OSC and the connection kit that is a downloadable pack for Ableton that she can then like change her loop over time just with her phone. Because again, she doesn't have a MIDI controller. She doesn't have a bunch of stuff she can go buy to interact with while she's performing, but she does have Ableton and she has a phone. So she's like, well, why don't I just move my phone around and change the loop? So that's a really exciting thing. And then another project that we're working on is a group project where we have 2 singers, a pianist, and an upright bassist. And they are basically trying, they've done it. The music that they've made isn't that interesting yet because they don't really know what to do to make it sound interesting, but the idea is really cool, where they're all going into Ableton and there's all sorts of mapping, again, with envelope followers, Touch OSC, accelerometers and stuff. So the idea is that everything that every one of them does is going to change the sound of everybody else. So you can see how that could get kind of uncool really fast, but if it's done right, there could be some really cool sounds there. And then I've got another student that's he's a drummer, and he's just putting these little contact mics, which I have right here, on his kit and just playing around with triggering, using his live drums to actually trigger, again, with the envelope followers. All of them wanted to work with the envelope followers because they're so cool. And so that's a little bit of what we're working on. So I'll show you what that might look like. Does everyone see my Ableton?
Yes.
Okay. So I think if I route my sound, it's going to be scary because of input monitoring. So I'm not going to do that, but you'll all get a sense of how this works from the visual here. So can you hear that by any chance?
We just hear the dry signal.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. So as I talk, it's following what I'm saying, right? Through these envelope followers. And then what we found creates the most interesting stuff. If I stop talking, you'll see. Is that if the envelope follower, rather than controlling a parameter exactly, if that's actually mapped to the rate of an LFO, and then the LFO is mapped to a different thing, that's when the sound gets really interesting. So I'm talking, you see that LFO speed up. It's changing the delay time. It's changing the amount on a frequency shifter. It's changing the frequency. It's changing the other delay time. It's a pretty crazy sound. If you could all hear what's going on in my headphones, it's pretty nuts. As you can see, when I stop talking, things calm down, right? So you can imagine having all these things, different performers mapped to each other, right? Using this mapping tool, chaining these up. Right now, I actually have, I'm not sure if I have that. It is interesting to map an envelope follower to another envelope follower and changing things like the gain and stuff like that, just to further disrupt the effects that are happening. Another thing that they're all using, not all, but have all explored, and most of them will use in their project, is this OSC capability. So this is the connection kit that you can download. It's free the Ableton site, and I've got this little interface on my phone, and you can just tell this to learn this fader that I'm using. And then I can map that fader to, say I'll map it to this send. So when I am doing this on my phone, let's say that this is voice going to reverb. So I can just control that send via my phone. And you can imagine how if you're performing live and you can use this with the other stuff, the amount of gear that you have to have is nothing. You just need to have a microphone and maybe a phone to create some absolutely wild live processing. And this is literally just like one track with a bunch of stuff thrown in the chain. And that is how you make an interesting algorithm. So that's what my students are exploring in this upper level class, which is totally fascinating. And they wouldn't be able to do this if they hadn't had those prior semesters of just learning the basics of Ableton and the musicianship that goes with that. So very fun. So that's kind of where technology sort of culminates in our curriculum, is this upper level class. And again, everyone is required to take one semester of this. So it's not that this is just a class for people that are interested in technology. Everybody has to take it. Everybody has to take it. Everybody has to take all of these. So it's pretty exciting. We also have another upper level class that's topics in generative music, which is really kind of like a topics in composition. And this doesn't explicitly have anything to do with technology, but it often just does. So right now I'm also teaching composing for film and media, which because the students now have such a robust background in technology from their prior courses, I don't have to talk about how to use a DAW in my composing for picture class, right? They already know how to do that. So we can really talk about the deep compositional and artistic elements of composing for film and composing for media, and making beautiful PDF scores and having that skill so that if they do end up in the film industry or in the game industry and they need to give a score to an orchestra or an ensemble or something like that, we can talk about some ways to make those scores look really nice. We're not just trying to cram all of that in to one semester, talking about this is how you use a DAW for this class, and this is also how you do cool artistic stuff, and this is also how you mix and master it. Like, these things are spread out enough in our curriculum that we can really focus in on the deep concepts behind these things. Same thing with composing for electronic media. We haven't yet taught this in our new curriculum, but that would be another class that was in the prior curriculum that Tom developed, where he works a lot with max patches. And now that our students are going to have such a deep understanding of Ableton before they even get to that class, the amount of things he's going to be able to do with the students, it's just totally blows it wide open. So it's really, really exciting how that class will be better now that it's supported by our first and second year curriculum. And then in other classes, Jeanne taught a generative music class. I can't remember the title of it, but it had to do with like finding your own personal voice as a composer. And a lot of that class was recording. People had to record themselves on their instrument and record improvisations that they were doing and mix them a little bit to create these like sonic representations of who they were. So that wasn't a technology class. And that's, Jeanne, who was not we don't even really have like technology faculty, but that hasn't historically been like what she's taught. But she's so facile with these things now because she's a musician in the world and she's brilliant that she can incorporate those kinds of things into a class that's not explicitly about technology. So that's a really, really exciting part of this too. And then just quickly, students are doing private instruction throughout their whole time, and being able to support students in technology, and that is such an amazing thing now. We have spaces where they can work on these things. And also, we can support students that come to us that are like, I'm interested in beat making. Like, there's a place for those students in our curriculum to deepen their musicianship and to deepen their practice. Whereas before it was like, okay, well, that's cool that you do that, but you should probably learn how to be a jazz pianist while you're here, right? It's not really that same kind of binary anymore. Talk about some case studies of that too. Another great thing about this is we used to have like a junior recital and a senior recital, which really was just like what exactly that sounds like, right? You do your junior performance of the things that you work on, and then you do your senior performance of what you're working on. Now those can be recorded projects. Like you could release an EP for your junior project if that felt like a better representation of what you wanted to study. So that's another way that we've kind of integrated technological tools and stuff into what we're doing. And then we have a lot of singer-songwriters that come to Cornish that we now, first thing we do when they get there is like, great, you're going to learn how to produce and record your own music just so you can do that if you want to. That's not necessarily going to be what everyone ends up doing in their career, but they have to know how. So now we can do that, and it's really exciting. I have some case studies. And then ensembles, right? Because of the way technology was in our curriculum, we actually were able to navigate the pandemic a little bit easier because in our ensemble classes, faculty could reasonably ask for a student to record their bass line, send it to the guitarist, they would record their guitar part, send it to, whoever, and then you create an ensemble performance that way. So it shifted. I still think that playing in ensembles in person is probably one of the most important aspects of being a musician. So we're back doing that. But now that students have this kind of capability, it opens up new and interesting ways that they could potentially collaborate. So, all right, I'm just going to talk about these. Interrupt me if you feel like you have something to say. These are all changed names, so it's funny for me to look at this, but so here are some examples. I'm gonna pull up the chat. I'm glad you're learning, Chelsea. Here's some examples of some of my students, some of my favorite humans in the world that have been on this journey with us. Many of these students started in our old curriculum and then shifted to the new curriculum, and they still benefited even though they were only in it for the last 2 years or last year of their journey. So Annie came to Cornish as a singer-songwriter, indie, guitarist, singer, vocalist, carried a lot of bitterness and resentment with some prior experiences that she'd had as a young woman in studios and working with producers. Very gifted artist, but never felt like she was really ever heard or listened to when she had ideas about production. But she never got to, she didn't know how to use the tools as like a 16-year-old, which is totally understandable. So when she came to Cornish, she was like, I'm going to learn how to do this. I'm going to learn how to produce my own music. I'm going to learn how to produce other people's music, and I'm going to be a producer. And she just was on it. And we had a curriculum that supported her in that. So she's releasing her senior project soon, and it's a film, and it's a song that she's now recorded her own EP. She's recorded many of our other students' projects, physically set up a studio in her home and acquired the microphones through rentals and things that she needed to record full bands and other ensembles. And then she mixes them, she masters them. She's getting into using electronic sounds. She's getting into recording interesting body percussion sounds because her drummers keep bailing on her. And I'm just like, go for it. Use your technological skills to further create your voice here. So she is a great example of how our curriculum has supported her just being able to achieve her vision as a singer-songwriter. Chelsea, which is a fake name, she came to us as a classical singer. We're talking girls chorus, she has a crazy resume in choruses. She's worked with all sorts of composers around the country that came, and when she got to Cornish, the only path for her was classical singer. And so she was going to have to just learn all these arias and do all this classical stuff, which just is right for some people, but was super duper not what she was interested in. She wanted to build classical vocal technique, but she had very different ideas of repertoire and music that she wanted to perform. So she got really into learning about experimental music, learning about technology, and performing other people's pieces that use that. And through my slight mind control, she, in her junior year, began to finally start composing her own electronic music with DAWs, really kind of tape music stuff that's just wild. And she uses her voice as a sound source for those things, still performs as a classical singer. But again, our curriculum supported her in being able to pursue that. Similarly, Martina came to us as a classical violinist with an interest in folk. And yeah, she just became very curious about DAWs, and through our curriculum, she just became this insane producer. Like, her ears are so amazing. She could create the most amazing mixes. She's figured out how to record her violin in exactly the way that she wants it to sound. She's collaborating with Annie on this final track. And because of her interest and, technological skills that she's gained, she is now empowered to kind of explore more soloistic territory. So she's singing, she's doing some kind of songwriting where she can layer herself like in the DAW. And then she's also really taken to film scoring, which is really exciting. So again, just things that wouldn't have happened for her if she had gone to a school to be a violin major at a more traditional program. And she's going to probably have a better career because of this, right? She's more diverse. That applies to everybody here. Betty is a second-year student, so still pretty fresh, but came to us with an incredibly deep knowledge of beat making, production. Betty sells her beats and her song structures like on the internet, collaborates with rappers all the time, very sophisticated producer. And so students like that are really exciting because at Cornish, in our instruction, we can support her to become sophisticated in her composition in that style, right? Like staying within whatever style interests her, but like, because she's already got this technological knowledge, we can deepen it, thinking about interesting timbres, thinking about structures that are really powerful, just going deeper and deeper and deeper into that style of electronic music without, veering from what's interesting to her. So those are really exciting students that maybe look a little bit different than the previous ones that I talked about. Steve is similar. Steve came to us as a transfer student. He left his prior school because he had this really, really significant interest in music production. I used to call him my baby James Blake. That's kind of his sound. Like he's got a beautiful voice and like very kind of dark songwriting, but all electronic. And he left his prior school because that's what he loved, and he couldn't explore that musically in the curriculum. And he was like, where do I go? Like, I don't want to like go to Berkeley and just, be like a canned producer. Like, I want to go somewhere where I can really be an artist, but explore these tools. And so he was a natural fit for us. And his composition has grown so much. So Steve is an example of maybe where Betty might be in her fourth year, where he's moved beyond, kind of making these song structures and stuff. And he's making these interesting, like he just sampled Sonny Rollins and made this then added like synth sounds and made this just like wild, like is totally beat based, still within like an electronic music kind of stylistic world, but just like incredibly interesting composition that's really accessible to a lot of different styles. So these are our students that are just killing it. And I could just like randomly point at any student in our program and you would find a story like this. So these are just the students that, I happen to know the best because they're in my studio, but I know for a fact that this is true of everybody in our program, which is very exciting. So all of that said, there's still some barriers. Something I encounter a lot that maybe could resonates with some of you is what I'm just calling tech anxiety. I feel like I see it a little bit more in Gen Z than maybe in my generation, but that's maybe just a not very large sample size observation. But to me, it looks exactly like performance anxiety, right? As a classical vocalist, I moved away from that because I had such profound performance anxiety. I would get up on stage and literally not be able to make sound. Like my vocal cords would be paralyzed. It's very common in the classical music world. We see this, I think, in all sorts of people, in all sorts of kinds of technology, where you're kind of confronted with something that maybe you're not that comfortable with, and then you just freeze up. I see this in students a lot. And now that our curriculum is the way that it is, they can't just run away from it like they used to be able to. So I think it's actually healthy to be seeing it, but I think we need to develop some ways to address it. So whenever I tell my students that what they're experiencing is actually just performance anxiety, that helps a lot and they can kind of work through it. So a case study would be Zara. She came to us as a classical pianist with absolutely no relationship to music technology. When she was in a fundamentals of electronic music class, which is the class that taught the musique concrète and the sampling that I was talking about, she made the most beautiful pieces, like fascinating compositional voice, like totally, learned how to do it like from the ground up, just, in the class, obviously, and just developed this incredible part of her practice. And she loved it. And she made these incredible tracks, did really well in the class, and had so much fun, and was really proud of herself that she had learned this new tool. But she didn't really do that. She didn't really use Ableton over the summer. And then when she came back this semester, there was just some things, as usually happens if you don't open something for a while, like she kind of forgot how to do some stuff. And then she just couldn't even open Ableton all semester. And this is a really great student, and she's fallen behind on a bunch of her assignments because she just didn't want to fail. And she was so afraid of the technology, which just broke my heart, because she, he did so well last year. And then she had a meeting with me the other day to talk about this. And she just said, I just think that the boys are better at this. And I was like, oh my gosh, all this work. Like, she literally said those words. And so we talked about that. And I think it was a great conversation where I made her realize that that wasn't the case, that maybe she was remembering and harboring some kind of stigma that doesn't come from anywhere other than just fake whatever, and she left the meeting feeling really inspired and really happy. So our fingers are crossed for Zara. She's gonna overcome the block. But just a reminder that we can never relent, right? If we're going to be making our culture and music tech healthy and welcoming and destigmatized. So, because I think this happens at all levels, students, adults, whatever, I feel it all the time. I just scrapped technology in a whole project that I was working on because I was like, no, this isn't feeling right. So we talked about these a little bit. Accessibility is still an issue, right? So just thinking about strategies to navigate price points. I'm encountering some issues with PC users and Mac users and their inability to collaborate in the classroom. That's an interesting thing. So creative solutions for that are always needed. We have a visually impaired student who can't use Ableton because it's not accessible in that way, or at least didn't used to be when he was in my class. So that is a really big issue. And then this is just kind of a funny observation that I've had. I feel like I'm a millennial, solid millennial. I feel like we tend to have a hacker mentality. We're like, I'm going to make this technology work because that's kind of how we grew up. I feel like the younger students are more like, oh, this device is just supposed to do what I want it to do. And there's not as much of a natural tendency towards troubleshooting that I think can serve that tech anxiety. So that's something that I'm trying to kind of observe and figure out how that works. I'd be curious to hear how those of you working with even younger students might encounter that. So just as a last note, dictionary. Last note, a student that graduated from us last year, this is his real name. You can look him up. I figure he graduated, so I can talk about him. Rogelio Resendiz. He came to us as a classical singer and then really found his compositional voice through technology. He had an opportunity to respond to an existing composition, and so he responded to Cage's 433 and made a piece that was 4 minutes and 33 seconds of testimonials from people seeking asylum at the border and sounds from detention centers at the southern border. So his intent behind this piece was, it's quite a privilege to be able to sit in silence for 4 minutes and 33 seconds and to clear your mind, because that's not how the people in my family, that is part of his history, is coming to the United States through that process. And that's not how he has always been able to experience that amount of time. So brilliant, deep use of technology in the creation of that piece. And now he's at CalArts pursuing a master's degree in vocal arts, but CalArts is a little bit like Cornish. They're a little wacky. They incorporate technology in a lot of ways. And so he's making a sound installation in LA based on this work, and he's just going for it. But he's still a classical singer, but this is just another thing that he does. It's perfect, right? I love it. Lindsay Collins, someone that graduated from us last year, she was a singer-songwriter, and she studied with me for a little bit. And she, like Annie, the student that I talked about, really wanted to learn how to produce her own music. She worked her butt off, and now she has a disco project, which I just think is great because she kind of came in this sort of like folky singing guitar, very analog world. And now she's just like all about disco and dream pop. And she produces her own work and other people's work. She's out there in the world doing that. So career opportunities, right? Through this kind of integration of technology. So I think that's my presentation. Woo, I talked a lot. Yay, Cornish. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you. That was phenomenal. That was quite a dive. Oh, my camera's not turning back on. Quite a dive into your curriculum. Thank you.
Yeah. I hope people copy us.
Yeah.
I cannot get over my jealousy right now. I'm so pissed.
That's what I was gonna say.
Right?
I wish that all the things you said, I've just kind of had to like stumble through on my own. Every single thing you brought up, I was like, oh, except for maybe sound design. That's one thing that I'm really interested in that but anyways, yeah, SPU had none of that stuff. They were totally like, I was like, I want to be, I don't know. I didn't even know what I wanted to be when I got there, but I'm 24 now. So yeah, that all sounds great. And
Yeah.
I hope schools do follow that kind of change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, knock on wood, that it's only a matter of time, right? I mean, Cornish has a great relationship with SPU. I know that they're really interested in what we've been doing. And that's just one example of how, these things, how curriculum and how musicianship changes in the world as people copy each other. I share all this because if any of you ever are in a situation to make curriculum at a college, like, steal our ideas, right? Steal the class. It's really important.
Working on stealing that for high schools.
Yeah, totally. Exactly. Right.
Yeah, I rapped at my senior classical piano recital and it did not go over well.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I need the beats. Like, what do you want from me?
Yeah. Yep.
I had some questions. I was really curious, have you encountered students who are resistant to this curriculum and to learning technology?
Yeah. When we made the switch, a student came to our chair's office and said, I heard we're not learning about the great masters anymore. And we were just like,
How pretentious.
if that's how you're going to think about music, like, the answer is, yeah, you're right. Like, maybe you should go somewhere else. But we embrace that student, and the fact is that students that maybe had those kinds of reactions, I will say from my observation, a lot of them were the classical, like, I'm a classical performer and I am here to play classical violin. Those were their initial reactions, but they were sold after the 2 weeks of classes in the new curriculum. Just sold because they were more supported. They had more time with their professors. They had more time to collaborate. They were learning more things. And the fact is that because some of those things that I pointed out, they were able to actually study their instrument on a deeper level because they weren't doing busy work in a bunch of classes that felt irrelevant to what they were doing, right? Like, if you need to learn Ableton, it's way more interesting to learn it through recording a piece for your violin and playing around with the sound of your violin than, like, here's a DAW class, like, open your DAW and screen record yourself as you, like, do all this kind of busy work, which is kind of how it has been taught in the past. So yeah, as soon as those students realized that what they were there to study wasn't being compromised but deepened, they were on board almost fully across the board. We did have maybe 1 or 2 students that transferred, which is a good thing. People should be where they want to be to study what they want to study. I mean, if you have, if you were set on, like, singing at the Met, I would argue that you should still have a well-rounded education, but if that fixation is gonna get in the way of your education at a place that maybe isn't thinking about music in that way, then you should go to a place that's thinking about music in that way, right? So we embrace that. Like, we embrace students, like, you know, coming and going if they to do what they need to do. But the fact is that this is actually, our retention rate like skyrocketed from like, it was like 62% from first to second year. Now it's at 95 after this new curriculum. So yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Seems like it's working.
Yeah. Which is, thank God. I mean, this was pretty risky, right? Like, we were all like, oh, like, okay, like, press the launch button. Oh my God, what's going to happen? Is everything going to crash? Because it's literally never been done before. Like, we're not basing this off of any curriculum that we've ever seen. We just did a ton of research for decades, and, you know, I guess that helps, right? But
I think it still for me sometimes goes back to that see one, do one, teach one thing. And also back to like language, how humans acquire language. Like, we learn to speak it first, then we learn how to write it. And that's what DAWs are for musicians in 2021.
Yep.
It's the manuscript paper.
That's
all it is.
Exactly. I love that. Yeah.
Sorry. Has anyone used Live in any of the ensembles? And as a follow-up question, can you create an electronic music ensemble, please? And can I do it? Thank you.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. Well, because of the pandemic, you know, we haven't had an opportunity to do like an actual live performance with technology. Like, we've done some streaming and we've done recorded performances of stuff. We had a student last year, his senior project was like, he had a dancer hooked up to sensors that was going through Ableton and going through Max. And it was incredibly cool and complicated, but it was pre-recorded. So we didn't really get to have the experience of, it was live, like the recording was live. But yeah, I mean, that'll start happening this semester. Like, in that class I was talking about, performing with electronics, like that group piece, like that is an ensemble piece, you know, using Ableton and using these kinds of tools that we are going to perform live. Like, that's the point of that class. It's not just to create these cool things, but it's actually like, how do you integrate this setup into like your stage presence and how you carry yourself, like when you walk on stage? When do you need to set your gear up? Like, when do you go to the green room? You know, what do you do when you come out on stage? Like, how do you invite the audience into that whole thing without just sitting at your laptop and be like, sorry, I gotta set this up, you know, which is gonna happen a little bit and it's fine, but you know, just being really sophisticated with how we use those things in a live setting. Yeah. I would love to do a laptop ensemble. Would love it. That'll happen, you know, just gotta get all these things off the ground. So maybe next year or the year after, we may have some kind of electronic music or laptop ensemble.
I think it's important that you figure out a good mascot and logo for that. Because I had a laptop ensemble in college, and it was called Mule, the Mansfield University Laptop Ensemble. And the teacher came up with like the best logo. It was like a circle with a mule in it. And instead of like bags, it has speakers. So it's a mule carrying like a PA system. And I still have that t-shirt. So yeah, that was a while ago and I still have it.
Amazing. Yeah, Cornish, like, or the Cornish hens. That's how I think. The corns. Like, there's just not a lot of great mascots. Although my college women's mascot was the missionaries. So, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I'm sure
mascots
that was
coming in like the Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah, real bad. Really bad. Yeah.
I mean, I have more questions.
Then let's keep those questions going. Go for it, Kate.
I was curious about what you were saying about performance anxiety, because I experienced a great deal of performance anxiety as a classical pianist, and I have none as a rapper or like none.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the role of trauma in performance anxiety and how that relates to technology, because it has been exclusionary and gatekeepy and weird for so long. And I'm wondering if you've talked to any of your students about that.
A little bit, and I think that that's a huge part of it. Yeah, I think that there's, you know, any level of trauma or feeling like, you know, that kind of trauma can be triggered or accentuated in so many different ways through technology, and it might be something that you don't even think of as that way that's going to contribute to that anxiety. I mean, that's part of my story. Like when I was learning to code in Super Collider in my doctorate, like I had a teacher that tried to kick me out of my doctoral program because I wrote him a course evaluation saying that he needed to have more Black artists and female artists like on his syllabus, and he was so pissed about that he like told the director of my program that I shouldn't be allowed to like study for my doctorate. And like that was such a weird experience, and that like he and I never like had a direct conversation that way, but finding out about that secondhand and like having to navigate like being a student in that situation was like, that was traumatizing, and I didn't want to have anything to do with technology like after that experience, right? But then I had to kind of work through it and find my way back in. So I think that's a huge part of it. I also like, it's interesting to look at the areas in which I have performance anxiety and the areas in which I don't. And the ones where I do, there's some experience like that is in the history of it. And the ones where I don't, it's all clean. Like no one ever told me I couldn't do it, right? It's just me as an artist.
Well, I think that the curriculum also probably gives a sense of ownership over that space that wasn't there. You know, you actually feel like you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I just think that's cool, and I'm jealous.
And peer support too, right?
Yeah.
Like even groups like this, or just like fostering that kind of thing in our curriculum of like, and in our student culture, just like, hey, we're all kind of working with this tool. Let's get together and help each other with it. It demystifies like this idea that there are some people that are really good at it,
Right.
and then other people who just absolutely aren't. And that used to be how it was. Like when I got to Cornish, there was like a little inner circle of like dudes that got to hang out with the technology guy because he had decided that they were really good at Pro Tools. But then he wouldn't even teach the people who were interested in it. When they would come to him and be like, I want to learn this, he'd be like, well, I don't really have time to teach you. You know, there's a really weird inequity there. And so, you know, just having it be something that everyone is working on, I think really helps with that too.
It's cool.
Yeah.
Chelsea had to take Essek out. I was like, needed a break. But
My dog doing. He's still here. He's sleeping.
hey, that's me and dog. Yeah, I'm teaching at O'Day right now. I'm teaching music technology there, and I was thinking about what you were saying about the difference in the generations. And like one kid yesterday, God, what did he say? He was, you know, doing it, and he's like, God, it's just so much work. Like, why can't we just like play it on Spotify? And I'm like, I don't even know where to begin with that idea or that comment. Like,
yeah.
Play what on Spotify? Also, one of them told me I could be Lil Uzi Vert's audio man if I wanted to. And I was like, wow, thanks.
I got a question on that.
Yeah.
So do you think us as educators should kind of stick to our guns when it comes to that? Like Kate, you were just saying like how students want that easy on button, right? Like they want the instant gratification or the instant. And I have that problem in my classroom too. So I'm like, I come from the era like where you kind of jump in and figure it out, you know, like, or you just jump in kind of like, oh, okay, I could do that. Okay, this ain't working, and you trial and error. They don't want to feel the error.
Yeah.
They just want everything to be like, oh, it worked that time. And every time you click a button, it worked that time. And then when it doesn't work, oh, forget this. I'm done. I'm logging off. Right. So as educators, do you think we should stick to our guns when it comes to reinforcing that challenge, like saying embrace the challenge in a nutshell? Or do we say like, hey, okay, if you could find an easy way to do it your way, go ahead. Like, how do you feel about that?
That's really interesting. because I think there is some value to like honoring that sometimes the path of least resistance, like as artists, is like good. Like you should do what you know how to do, right? And you shouldn't. It's like not automatically going to be like great art if you had a deep struggle in creating it, right? So there's something there that I think is important, but I just think it kind of comes to like a wider philosophical discussion about technology, like in our society, like not to be too dorky about it, but I think that like, it is important to be critical of technology and realize that like we create, like humans created it. And so we can troubleshoot it. We can figure out what's going wrong and we can fix it. I think that is a healthier, like, relationship to have with technology just as a person, because maybe to me, I mean, I'm sure that there's studies on this, but to me that can break up any kind of like dependency on it, that might like be unhealthy, thinking maybe outside the music world a little bit, right? Just like thinking about dependency on social media and like all these kinds of things. So I personally think, yeah, like we should stick to that. And by sticking to it, like creating ways for students to learn how to troubleshoot and maybe like creating ways that they feel like encouraged to think about fixing stuff, like, yeah, I feel like I'm just talking about that all the time with my students. They'll be like, oh, this doesn't work. Like I should quit. And I'll be like, hey, that's part of it. That's part of this experience. Like I think saying like everyone experiences that is kind of a helpful thing to keep reminding them of, so that they don't feel like personally challenged by it, right? Just like,
yeah, like I think the willingness to admit what you don't know also in this field, like, okay, you were talking about envelope following and I was like, I have not used that at all. I don't know what the heck that does.
Yeah.
I'm like, should I ask? I'm like, no, I'll just Google it.
Yeah.
In the spirit of being like, nobody can know everything. I'm like, I don't know what the hell that does.
Yeah.
Look into it now.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Googling
though.
is important though. Yeah.
Yeah, because I actually saw like this guy doing something on like a SP, some kind of drum machine, an old school joint, and he was killing, like doing some crazy thing. I was like, what the heck is this dude doing? And he would tell you how to do it. Like he'd be like, okay, I'm granular synthesis or whatever some crap was. And I was just like, I don't know what that is, but the challenge of like when you hear the final result of something, you're like, oh, that's dope. It's like, okay, I want to go try to figure out how to do that instead of like, oh, I just want my beat to sound like that. It's like, okay, let me go dive in now and like exercise that skill. And that's what I think a lot of people are losing. It's like, yes, creativity, but it's still a skill. You got to like exercise it, right? Yeah. So
yeah, totally. Well, and I love what you just said about like, being inspired by something or even just like imagining something crazy that you want to make or like a sound that you want to try and make, and then using that imagination or that inspiration point that maybe you've heard from another artist as the goal, because then it's like if you have something that you've never done as something you want to try and make, then you will like by default like explore new tools to try to get there versus like just working with what you already know how to do and then not really thinking about what the result is, but just knowing, oh, I know how to do this and this and this really well, so I'm just going to keep doing that and like I'll make a new track. Like, I mean, there can be useful sometimes, but that's something I actually encounter a lot with the students that come to us with like already a pretty sophisticated understanding of DAWs and especially of beat making. Like there's always a couple of lessons or like a transformational moment where I'm like, you need to actually think about something that you want to make before you start making it, right? And think about a sound that you want to create before you get in your DAW and just start messing around. Because that I mean, that's one aspect of being an artist, right? So, yeah.
Seems like we're not still talking about stage nerves.
We can.
Yeah.
No, I was just gonna share anecdotally that for me, I had a similar experience to what Kate was describing, where like I had all sorts of stage fright playing clarinet, classical clarinet in front of people, and almost no stage fright playing playing guitar in a rock band in a bar full of drunk people.
Yeah.
And it might be that the crowd is drunk. And so I know that they're not going to remember if I make a mistake. But I think it's more that like there's less pressure because I know I'm going to get to play all of these songs next week at another show. It's not this whole like, all right, let's work up all of these really hard classical music pieces for one concert. And then we're going to play at one concert and we're going to put it all away.
Yeah.
So you better be ready because that one concert is your only chance to play it right. Yeah.
Yeah.
The attitude is very different.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
That was it.
I have so many.
And then I think you were talking about getting kids to do things that seemed to be where things were when I like came halfway back in.
Yeah, I mean, we're
Talking
just
about
talking about
teaching.
how maybe those of us in more the millennial strata have more of a, I call it kind of more like a hacker mindset or like a troubleshooting mindset. Like if things don't work, like we just kind of feel like, oh, okay, well, it's kind of on me to figure out how that works because that's sort of how we grew up, like learning about computers. But that maybe, you know, definitely the generation that I'm working with, they don't think that way.
That's the joke I'm always making about MacBooks.
Yeah.
MacBooks are harder, like as far as the management of the device, a MacBook is way easier to manage. Or at least it used to be that way. I feel like they're more more evenly with PCs now as far as like manageability of the device and OS and all that stuff. But yeah, I remember people complaining about that all the time. It's like, oh yeah, well I really like Mac, but I want to be able to do whatever I want to my computer. I want to be able to mess around with its innards.
Yeah. I don't know. It's Gen Z, they're just, I don't know.
That was always my issue with GarageBand too. It's like made it too easy, so I can't do anything that I want to do.
Yeah, that's a real thing that I noticed. Like a lot of our students will come to us. I had a couple students that, you know, this was a while ago before we really started using Ableton, but they would like show me something they were making in GarageBand, and then I would like a singer-songwriter or whatever, and then I would like look at their vocal chain. I would be like, why do their vocals sound so like messed up right now? Like this sounds so bad. Like what is happening? And I just looked at the chain, and it was just some default, just like compressor upon noise gate compressor, like blah, and it was like completely unnecessary for like, and they're like, oh, I thought that's just like what I was supposed to do, like if it was a vocal. It's like, no, you know, like we gotta start, like you gotta understand your sound before you start, you know, doing stuff to it. Yeah, there's a lot of that. And a lot of that is related to anxiety too, because it's definitely like all the students are like, oh my God, I really want this to sound good. I guess I should just throw in like 3 GarageBand vocal chains. And then it's just like, sounds like garbage.
Yeah, just compress the ever living shit out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then reverb everywhere.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. I want to be mindful of time. We have about 10 minutes left. Are there any other questions we want to ask Kaley? If not, we might. Oh yeah, go ahead.
For an old cat like me that's been spending years doing like the tech part, I want to hone my like instruments. I want to get back into like playing again. Like I play the keys and the horn and stuff, but I want to reinforce that. What would be your suggestion? So like obviously I don't want to go to school for another 4 years. And I don't want to look at YouTube videos for 10,000 hours. How could I get that same level of education without spending so much time, like, you know, going back to school? Or like, is there a shortcut? Is there like a 2-year thing? Is there like a 1-year thing? Like, how would you go about that?
Oh, man. That is really hard to answer. I mean, I think I'm going to be annoying and be like, that's such a good question because it reminds us that, like, you know, if you're working in production or working with technology, like those musicianship skills and like those instrumental skills are like, it just makes your music so much better if you can, like, you know, have that practice, be super comfortable. I mean, I would just say, like, from my own experience, a little bit of a different path, but similar in that I was kind of just like doing composition forever, and I like didn't play, or sing for like a long time. And I was starting to feel that. I was like, oh, I kind of feel like the stuff that I'm making, whether it was using technology or not, is like not as good as it used to be, because I feel really distant from my like physical kinesthetic music practice, like the singing and the playing and like my technique. And I just decided that I would kind of go analog for a while and just like write songs, like just focus on like, and also covering songs, like doing some transcribing and like teaching myself to play stuff, and then working on my own things and creating my own things, and then practicing my own things, and like having them be totally not dependent on technology, just straight up like the piano, my keyboard skills, my singing skills. I mean, I did that for like a year before I started like getting back into integrating everything again. So, I mean, that's just my experience, and that worked for me. But I think that I think it is good as musicians, and I tell my students this too, to like remember that we're going to go through like these different waves in our practices, and like that it's never too late to just like go back and really just focus on your chops for a long time. Because if you have any background with that whatsoever, like it will come back. You just have to spend some dedicated time. And for me, that was like, I mean, I'm a recovering classical musician. So for me, that was telling myself that like the things that I needed to practice were like things that I wanted to practice, not just like, oh, I'm going to sit here and play Bach preludes and that'll be a better pianist. Like I became, through that like period of my life, I became like, I feel kind of the strongest I've ever felt as a musician now, because I'm working on, my own music and things that I'm really inspired to play. And that's not just, that's my music, but there's also like artists that I'm trying to cover and just learn their tunes, so I can learn from them. It's really just Joni Mitchell right now. It's like, learn all these Joni songs. So this is where these are some skills I need to hone. But I think that, it would be great if Cornish had like a certificate program, like a 1 year kind of like certificate to work on whatever kind of skill that, like working adults and professionals want to go back and just like hone something. We are talking about that. It's definitely not something that exists now, but we are going to start, I forget what the title is called. It's going to be like an extensions. It's formerly known as extensions, but it's a new school that's for ages 5 to 99. That's like taught by our faculty for exact things like that. So it's very like community oriented and geared towards K-12, but then also like working professionals that want to be honing their skills. So yeah, keep an eye on Cornish, because that's totally something we would do, right? Like we would have like musicianship classes or like ensembles that people could be in, like that are around people your age, of your same experience level, not college students, right? That I think it's just really important for us to be in the community that way. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Hello. I have a question about
Yeah.
Super Collider.
Oh,
I'm actually a web developer.
cool.
And so the intersection of music technology and programming seems pretty interesting to me, but it looks a little bit intimidating. How would you recommend, like, should I just start messing around, making
Super
sounds?
Collider?
Yeah.
Yeah. I got some lectures on how to get started with Super Collider. Lectures as in like they are code documents with me typing like funny jokes about code that I used for my students to learn how to get started in Super Collider, that I would be happy to share with anyone. If you guys want that.
Maybe that would be
Yeah,
amazing.
Yeah. Send me your email addresses, or I can just send them to Chelsea. And
Well, I was gonna ask, would you feel comfortable posting it in the educational resources channel
Yeah.
in our Discord?
Yeah,
That'd be
I can
cool.
totally do that. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, Super Collider's beasts. Like, I had no programming experience other than like making my Angel Fire site like look really amazing when I was like 12 years old. And so when I got to my doctorate and they were like, "Oh, we don't do DAWs here at UW. You're gonna learn Super Collider." That's where that little trauma experience that I was talking about came from. But I got so pissed off at how horribly it was taught that I just decided to learn it myself so that I could be better than all my professors at it, which actually happened, which is unbelievable to me because I had no experience with it. But it is just one of those things that the more you just do, it's like a language, right? Like you just have to practice it and make stuff with it. It's okay if you're making things with it and you don't know what they're doing. Like just keep like just do it. Like who cares if you don't know how that algorithm works? Like if it makes sound, like cool, you know. So I mean, having no pretense about it is an important attitude to have, I think. So yeah.
Sweet. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll throw those in the Discord. That'll be fun. Cool. Well, thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. And if you have students that want to come to Cornish, you know,
I'll send them your way.
Yeah, I mean, literally, you can just give him my email address if that ever if that ever comes. My brother's a high school teacher, so it like happens every now and then. And he's just like, "Oh, this person wants to learn about music." All right, I'll talk to him. So,
we'll learn.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you for being here for our first iteration of the Ableton User Group led by us.
Woohoo!
Good to see you. Everyone take care.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.